Hi, everyone. So to continue our conversation that we began last time about the Mfecane, we noted the rise of Shaka Zulu and some of the innovations that he introduced into warfare and into society formation. And this ended up being tremendously disruptive. Late in his career, in the 1820s, in the years leading up to his assassination, Shaka sent out his troops on annual military campaigns. And so this wasn't kind of a one-off thing, after he defeated um, the Ndwandwe and established the Zulu kingdom. He wasn't content with that. He wanted to continue to expand and ultimately created an empire, right, that controlled a tremendous amount of land from a kind of capital which was called Bulawayo. Um, Not to be confused with the city of Bulawayo in Zimbabwe today, but it does come from the same Nguni word. In any case, with this Zulu expansion, various Nguni groups who chose not to submit to Shaka and to his successors, and were thus not incorporated into the Zulu Empire, fled from KwaZulu. Um, they fled into the Drakensberg, they fled to the south, they fled to the north, they fled across the mountains up into the Highveld, and in some cases ran into other the inhabitants who were living there and caused disruption among them, right? And so there's a sort of domino effect. And this collectively is what we call the Mfecane. Um, and the Europeans are going to get involved in this too, and that's what we'll talk about in the next video lecture. But this led people to a great deal of desperation, right? Some, frankly, even turned to cannibalism. They were unable to find food. Crops were destroyed by the marauding Zulu warriors. People fleeing were not able to take seeds with them, not able to establish new farms in time. Um, Almost certainly large numbers of people died from starvation. We don't necessarily have accurate statistics on that, but those who did manage to survive, in some cases, became increasingly desperate and even became cannibals. And so this is a really terrible, terrible time. Hence, it's called the Mfecane, the time of troubles. Right. Um, uh, some groups were able to maintain some sort of cohesion. One of the rival chiefs to Shaka, whose name was Mzilikazi, he managed to keep his people together, and they fled to the west after being defeated by the Zulu. Went over the Drakensberg Mountains into the Highveld, running into the northern Sutu peoples here, and eventually carving out a kind of kingdom for themselves up here uh, in what the Europeans come to call the Transvaal region. This group is called the Ndebele. They are also Nguni, and this new kingdom is actually going to be rather short-lived because later they're going to be driven across the Limpopo into the southern part of what later becomes called Rhodesia and then Zimbabwe. Other Nguni fled even further afield from this. Okay, so this altered the social and political landscape not only in South Africa but in much of southern and central and east Africa. There was a group called the Shoshangane, for instance, who fled across kind of north of Delagwa Bay here, which was the Portuguese trading ports, north into the Portuguese territory here, eventually becoming one of the dominant peoples of the country of Mozambique. There were other Nguni groups who fled to the north and settled in what later became the country of Malawi. There were even some groups who went all the way north into the Great Lakes region around Lake Tanganyika and Lake Malawi, uh, into what later became the country of Tanzania, right? And so we find Nguni languages in some cases spoken by small groups of people in these modern nations. All of that is the result of the Mfecane. And these refugees, many of whom carried with them the the Unguni traditions of warfare, and having learned some of the lessons of Shaka, destabilized the territories that they immigrated to, because they took these military innovations with them, and in some cases attacked the people of those territories and carved out for themselves some land, and a place to settle there, right? And so this was destabilizing for much more than just South Africa. Um, Another group who were able to maintain cohesion are the Swazi. Under a chief named Sobuza, and eventually under his son Mswati, the Swazi went to the north, and the Drakensberg kind of curves around like this, and so this is in the kind of northeastern part of the Drakensberg Mountains, and over to the coast, over toward Delagwa Bay here. The Swazi settled in that area. Initially under Sobuza, they maintained social cohesion, but under Mswati, they became, a really cohesive people. The thing about the Swazi is that they are not just Nguni. They incorporated many of the northern Sutu peoples whom they encountered, who were already living in this area. The modern region of South Africa called Mpumalanga. And these Nguni mixed with the Sutu, and so the Swazi are a composite of Nguni and Sutu. The language Siswati that the Swazi speak is mostly Nguni based, but with a large borrowing of vocabulary from Sutu. And Sobuza establishes a kingdom there that is called Swaziland. Only recently did this country change its name to Eswatini. But Swaziland was the historical capital, and the formation of that kingdom was a result of the Mfecane. Maybe the most interesting of all of the kingdoms that emerge from the Mfecane is the kingdom of the southern Sutu people, led by a fellow named Moshweshwe. Now, if you look at that name, a Westerner is obviously going to pronounce this Moshushu. The OE diphthong in Bantu languages is pronounced way, like W-A-Y. A single O is pronounced as a double O, usually in Bantu languages, at least Southern African Bantu languages, so Mushweshwe is how you say that. Mushweshwe managed to unite. And so how did the Sutu get involved in this? Well, some of them were living down here east of the Drakensberg Escarpment. Many of them were living here in the southern Highveld. As various Nguni refugees were fleeing the Zulu, they ran into the Sutu. In some cases, sort of pushed them across the Drakensberg. Some Nguni came up here into the Highveld, like into Bele. And so Mushweshwe offered a stable chiefdom that people were able to kind of coalesce around, right? The thing that was different about Mushweshwe, different from any of these other groups, is that he established his kingdom, which came to be called Lesotho, on the basis of peace and social harmony rather than around kind of military social organization. Okay, so we talked about how Shaka transformed his entire society to support his military, even though the Sutu did fight frequently. Even though they continued to raid cattle from among their neighbors, continued to defend themselves, certainly, right? There was a warrior ethos. Mushweshwe, for the entirety of his career, which spans much of the 19th century, Mushweshwe lives all the way till about 1870 or something like that. So he's around for a really long time, and we will talk about him more as we go along. Mushweshwe was a very skilled diplomat. And this is probably one of the things that allowed him to gather such a large and cohesive group of Sutu around him and to establish a kingdom that was pretty stable. The Caledon River is this river that flows just to the west of the Drakensberg. The Caledon River Valley is right here, kind of the northern border of the modern country of Lesotho. The capital that Mfecane established was fortified there. It backed up against the mountains. It was called Tababosiu. You can see it on the map here. Okay, but most of the Sotho lived here in the river valley. However, they could, if they were threatened, flee into the mountains, which they also controlled here, right? So the kingdom of Lesotho sort of spanned the river valley and the mountains both, right? With Tababosiu sort of sitting right in the middle of those two as a fortified compound for Mfecane and for his court. Okay. I wish that more was said about Mfecane. He is a truly remarkable figure, one who deserves a great deal more attention, I think. And so let's pay attention to him as we go forward, right? He uses, for the most part, even though sometimes engages in warfare, again, uses diplomacy as a way to make his kingdom successful. Now, in addition to this, there's more disruption beyond this that's more difficult to track on a map here. Okay, for one, there are a lot of the Tswana-speaking peoples and the Sotho-speaking peoples, or the Basotho and the Botswana, as they're called in their native tongues, who, as a result of the disruptions caused all through the Highvelds, with the migrations of these Nguni peoples out of KwaZulu, who make their way down here into the Cape, and at times, well, they go to work for both the British and for the Afrikaners. Okay, this European-controlled territory for them is seen as more stable and more promising than their homelands due to the Mfecane. So the disruptions caused by the Mfecane make it impossible, not that this would have been maybe likely anyway, but it becomes impossible for the Bantu peoples to present any kind of united front in the face of European expansion. Okay, we talked already in the previous lecture about the Xhosa Wars, about this group called the Mfengu. You can see the Mfengu. There's another group called the Hlubi, who also make their way into Xhosa territory here, though coming through the Highvelds, kind of around the Sotho. Both of these groups were partly incorporated into the Xhosa, who were, as we said, caught between the Zulu expansion over here in the eastern part of South Africa in KwaZulu-Natal, and the British and Afrikaner expansion coming from the Cape, right? The Xhosa are right in the middle of this. And, you know, we already discussed the Xhosa Wars, the conquest of this area, the driving of the Xhosa across the Kai River ultimately. Well, much of that is the result of the instability caused by the Mfecane. The Mfengu were never fully incorporated by the Xhosa, and in many cases the Mfengu decided rather to take sides with the white Europeans in the battles against the Xhosa. Okay, and so, you know, these disruptions make it much more difficult for the Xhosa themselves to present any sort of united front and threat, cohesive threat against the European expansion, right? And we're going to see that, you know, this has further consequences. So we will talk next time. We will sort of fit the last few pieces of the puzzle of this early 19th century South African picture together. We will pick up the story of the Four Trekkers, which we mentioned earlier, talk about the Great Trek and the consequences that has. And this will leave us with a fairly stable political map by the 1870s and 1880s, before the whole of South Africa is thrown into massive disruption with the discovery of diamonds and then gold, which changes absolutely everything. Okay, so we'll talk about that in the next lecture. If you have questions about any of this, as always, please ask them on the discussion boards.